My name is Eric, and I'm 37. My wife, Vanessa, is 34. We've been married for 9 years, and for most of that time I thought we were solid. We've got no kids, but we've built a comfortable life together. I run a small but growing logistics company that I've poured my blood, sweat, and tears into, while Vanessa works as a freelance graphic designer. Lately, though, things have felt off. Vanessa's always been a little high maintenance, but over the last few months, her attitude has gone from picky to outright nasty. Everything I do seems to irritate her: how I load the dishwasher, the way I chew, even the fact that I'm too focused on work. The late-night complaints started coming with a side of unexplained absences. She'd started going out more often, claiming she was meeting clients or grabbing drinks with friends. She'd roll her eyes if I asked questions and accuse me of being controlling. "God, Eric, you're so paranoid," she'd snap, her tone dripping with contempt. But I wasn't being paranoid. I was paying attention. I first noticed the weirdness about 3 weeks ago. Vanessa started taking a taxi service everywhere instead of driving herself or using rideshare apps. When I asked why, she said her car was acting up, and she didn't want to deal with the hassle of a rental. That made sense for about a day. But then I noticed that the same driver always seemed to pick her up. "Who's this guy you're always riding with?" I asked one evening, trying to keep it casual. She didn't even look up from her phone. "Just some guy. He's nice, doesn't ask too many questions." Why does it matter? It mattered because something about it didn't sit right with me. But I let it go, at least for the moment. Little did I know, that taxi driver was about to blow my entire life apart. About a week after our conversation about the taxi driver, things took a turn. Vanessa was still using the same driver, this wiry guy with a scruffy beard and a smug grin I could see even from the living room window. She didn't seem to care that I'd notice him sitting in the driveway for a minute too long after she got out. One night, I decided I couldn't ignore it anymore. Vanessa had been working late on a client project and came home 3 hours later than she said she would. She looked a little too put together for someone who'd been designing logos. Her makeup still perfect and her hair freshly styled. "You're late," I said as she walked through the door. She rolled her eyes and set her purse down. "You're always watching the clock, Eric. It's exhausting." I didn't respond. I just watched as she kicked off her heels and grabbed a glass of wine, acting like nothing was wrong. But I couldn't let it go. "Vanessa, who is that guy? The driver?" I asked, keeping my tone calm. She froze for half a second before turning to me with an incredulous look. "What's with the interrogation? He's just a driver, Eric." But something in her voice cracked, just slightly. I decided to trust my gut. That night, after she fell asleep, I went through her purse. I know, snooping isn't a good look, but my instincts were screaming that something wasn't right. Sure enough, I found a crumpled receipt tucked inside. It was from a bar across town, a place Vanessa and I had never been to together. The timestamp was from earlier that evening, long before she got home. My stomach twisted as I stared at it. She wasn't working late. She was somewhere else. The next day, I left work early and waited. Around 5 p.m., the same damn taxi pulled up in front of our house, and Vanessa climbed in, laughing at something the driver said. My blood boiled, but I forced myself to stay calm. I followed them. They didn't head toward any client's office or downtown bar. Instead, they pulled into the parking lot of a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. My chest felt like it was caving in as I watched Vanessa get out of the car and walk toward one of the rooms. The driver followed, his hand grazing her lower back like he'd done it 100 times before. I sat there in my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Every logical part of me told me to leave, to think it through, to not act on impulse. But logic doesn't stand a chance when your world is imploding. I waited 2 hours, stewing in rage, before they finally came out. She kissed him on the cheek, laughing like this was just another casual day in her life. I snapped a few photos on my phone, my hands shaking. Then I drove home, my mind a blur of anger, betrayal, and disbelief. Vanessa didn't come back until later that night, acting like nothing was wrong. When I asked how her work went, she gave me a dismissive, "Fine," and went straight to the shower. I sat on the couch, staring at the photos on my phone. This wasn't just an affair. This was something else entirely, and I was going to find out what. Vanessa's shower that night felt like the calm before the storm, and I was the storm brewing in the living room. I stared at the photos I'd taken, her leaning into the driver, his hand on her back, the motel in the background. My chest burned with anger, and every nerve in my body screamed to confront her the second she walked out. When she finally emerged, wearing her usual oversized tee and acting like nothing had happened, I couldn't hold back anymore. "Vanessa," I said, my voice low but steady. She glanced at me, raising an eyebrow. "What? Where were you tonight?" She rolled her eyes, grabbing her wine glass from the table. "I already told you. I was working. Can we not do this, Eric?" I stood up, holding up my phone. "Try again. Because this doesn't look like work to me." Her face froze as she stared at the photos, the color draining from her cheeks. But then, in true Vanessa fashion, she recovered quickly, her expression shifting to defiance. "So you're spying on me now?" she snapped, crossing her arms. "That's pathetic, Eric. Pathetic." I shot back, my voice rising. "You're cheating on me, Vanessa, with your damn taxi driver, and you have the audacity to call me pathetic." Her eyes narrowed, and she smirked, a cold, calculated expression that sent a chill down my spine. "Oh, grow up, Eric. It's not like we've been happy for a while. Maybe if you weren't so obsessed with your stupid business, I wouldn't have had to look elsewhere." I froze. That wasn't just a low blow, it was deliberate. She wanted to hurt me, to deflect from her betrayal by twisting the knife deeper. "Don't even try to blame this on me," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "You've been lying to my face, sneaking around with that guy, and now you're going to play the victim?" She rolled her eyes again, her tone dripping with contempt. "Oh, please, you wouldn't understand. At least Mark listens to me." "Mark." I repeated the name in my head, trying to place it. It sounded familiar, but I couldn't figure out why. The next day, I decided to dig deeper. If Vanessa wasn't going to come clean, I'd find the truth myself. I started with the taxi service. After a few hours of sleuthing online, I managed to find Mark's full name, Mark Henderson. Something about it rang a bell, but I couldn't quite place it. Then it hit me like a freight train. Mark wasn't just some random taxi driver. He used to be my friend. Years ago, Mark and I had worked together when I was just starting my business. We'd been close partners, almost. But things had gone south fast when I caught him stealing clients behind my back. I'd cut him off completely, and he'd disappeared from my life. Until now. I confronted Vanessa that night, my anger barely contained. "Mark Henderson," I said, throwing the name at her like a grenade. Her eyes flickered with recognition before she masked it with that same smug expression. "What about him? You didn't think I'd figure it out?" I growled. "He's not just your affair partner, Vanessa. He's a con artist. He used to work with me. He tried to steal my business, and now he's using you to get to me." Her face shifted, a flicker of panic flashing across her features. But she recovered quickly, sneering at me. "Oh, don't be so dramatic, Eric. Not everything is about you. Mark actually values me, unlike you." Her words felt like a slap, but I didn't back down. "You're a pawn in his game, Vanessa. And when he's done using you, he'll toss you aside like trash." She laughed, but it sounded forced. "You're just jealous. Mark's twice the man you'll ever be." That was it. I was done arguing with someone who clearly didn't care about the truth, or about me. I walked out of the room, slamming the door behind me. But inside, I was already planning my next move. If Mark thought he could waltz back into my life and destroy everything I'd built, he was in for a rude awakening. The second I walked out of that room, I knew this wasn't just about a cheating wife anymore. This was war. Mark had wormed his way back into my life, using Vanessa to try and sabotage everything I'd worked for. He wanted to destroy me, and if Vanessa was too blind or too stupid to see it, that was her problem. I spent the next few days digging into Mark's life. Social media was a goldmine. His profile was littered with posts bragging about his hustle and side gigs. What caught my attention was a series of vague posts about starting a new venture, a logistics business eerily similar to mine. That confirmed it. He wasn't just after my wife. He was after my company. I called my lawyer, Sarah, the next day. She's been with me since I started my business, and I knew she'd have my back. "Sarah, I need you to look into someone for me," I said, pacing the floor of my office. "Mark Henderson. He used to work with me, and I think he's trying to steal my clients." Sarah didn't hesitate. "Send me everything you've got. If he's pulling anything shady, we'll find it." While Sarah got to work, I decided to set my own trap. If Mark thought he was clever, he hadn't seen anything yet. I called Vanessa while she was out, probably with Mark, though I didn't care anymore. "Hey," I said, keeping my tone calm. "I've been thinking. You're right, we haven't been happy. Maybe we should talk things out, figure out what's best for both of us." Her silence was telling. She didn't trust my sudden change of tone, but she couldn't resist taking the bait. "Fine," she said finally. "Let's talk tonight." That evening, I played the role of the contrite husband. I told Vanessa I wanted to make things right, that I'd been too focused on work and hadn't appreciated her enough. I even suggested we take a trip, just the two of us, to reconnect. She ate it up. "You really mean that?" she asked, her voice softening for the first time in weeks. "Of course," I said, forcing a smile. "But first, I need to tie up a few things at work. I've got some important deals in the pipeline." Her eyes flickered with interest. That was exactly what I wanted. The next day, I accidentally left my laptop open on the kitchen counter with fake financial documents pulled up. Information about non-existent deals, client names, and expansion plans. Then I left for work, fully expecting Vanessa to snoop. Sure enough, when I got back, the laptop had been moved. Now came the hard part, waiting. A week later, Sarah called with news. "Eric, you were right. Mark's been pitching your clients, claiming he's offering a better deal. But here's the kicker, he's using insider information. Stuff no one outside your company should know." I clenched my fist. "Vanessa," I muttered. "Sounds like it," Sarah agreed. "But don't worry, we've got him. His emails are sloppy, and we've got enough evidence to take legal action." That night, I confronted Vanessa. "Tell me, Vanessa," I said as she sat on the couch scrolling through her phone. "How much is Mark paying you to spy on me?" She froze, her phone slipping from her hand. "What are you talking about?" I held up my laptop, showing her the fake documents. "I set you up. Every piece of information you gave Mark was a lie. And now I've got proof that he's been stealing from me." Her face turned pale. "Eric, I didn't." "Save it," I snapped. "You sold me out, Vanessa. And for what? Some loser who drives a taxi and thinks he's a big shot? You betrayed me and helped him try to ruin my business." She stood up, her voice rising. "You don't understand, Eric. Mark said you deserved it. He told me you cheated him out of his business, that you've been screwing people over for years." I laughed bitterly. "And you believed him?" "Without question. You didn't think for a second that he might have an agenda?" She didn't answer. Her silence said everything. I didn't let her pack much. I handed her a duffel bag and told her to leave. "Go stay with Mark," I said coldly. "You two deserve each other." She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. But I wasn't done yet. Mark had tried to play me, and now it was my turn. With Vanessa out of the house, I turned all my focus to taking Mark down. He thought he could manipulate my wife, steal my business, and walk away without consequences. But he underestimated just how far I was willing to go. My first move was leveraging the evidence Sarah had uncovered. Mark had been using insider information to poach my clients, but now, thanks to Vanessa's stupidity, I had proof that he'd been fed fake data. That made his actions not just unethical, but outright fraudulent. Sarah drafted a cease and desist letter, along with a lawsuit for damages. "Once this hits his inbox," she told me, "he's going to wish he'd never heard your name." But I wasn't content to just hit him legally. Mark's ego was too big for that. I wanted to destroy him on every level. Step 2 involved those very clients he'd been trying to steal. I called each one personally, explaining how Mark had been feeding them lies. I didn't hold back, laying out exactly how he'd been using stolen information and how it was all about sabotaging me. The best part? Most of them had already sensed something was off with him. Mark had overpromised, and his amateurish plans were already falling apart. By the end of the week, not only had I solidified my relationships with those clients, but I'd also convinced 2 of them to spread the word about Mark's tactics to others in the industry. Mark's name was becoming toxic, fast. Then came step 3, going after his so-called business. Mark had been bragging online about his new logistics venture, so I started digging. A quick investigation revealed it was barely more than a shell operation. He didn't have the licenses, the infrastructure, or the capital to compete with me. That's when I had an idea. Using one of my business contacts, I arranged to undercut Mark on every deal he tried to pitch. My contact made it look like a coincidence, but in reality, I was pulling the strings. Every time Mark thought he'd landed a deal, I swooped in and took it out from under him. By this point, Mark was floundering. Rumors were circulating about his shady tactics. His clients were jumping ship, and his so-called business was hemorrhaging money. But I wasn't done yet. I decided to confront him face to face. I knew where Mark hung out, a dingy bar downtown that suited his lowlife persona perfectly. I waited until he was there alone, nursing a drink, looking like the weight of the world was on his shoulders. "Mark," I said, sliding into the seat across from him. He looked up, startled, then sneered. "Eric, come to gloat." "Something like that," I said, leaning forward. "You thought you could steal from me? Ruin my life? You're nothing but a parasite, Mark. And now you're reaping what you sowed." He laughed bitterly, but there was no confidence behind it. "You think you're so smart, don't you? You don't even see it, do you?" "See what?" I asked, my voice cold. He smirked. "Vanessa wasn't just some pawn. She's been feeding me your weaknesses for months. Every time you doubted yourself, every time you complained about a client, she told me. She was in on it from the start." I felt a flash of rage, but I kept my face neutral. "And look how that worked out for you. She's just as dumb as you are." Mark's smirk faltered. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low. "You think you've won, but I've still got cards to play." I leaned closer, my voice a whisper. "You're broke. Your reputation is in the gutter, and you're looking at a lawsuit that'll bury you. Go ahead, Mark. Play your cards. I'll burn your whole deck." I stood up and walked out, leaving him stewing in his failure. Mark's thinly veiled threat didn't bother me. It fueled me. He was floundering, desperate, and completely out of his depth. The lawsuit Sarah filed was the final nail in his coffin. Within days, Mark's lawyer reached out, practically begging for a settlement. He didn't have the resources to fight back, and we both knew it. I made the terms clear. He'd pay damages, sign a non-compete agreement to stay out of the logistics business for good, and admit fault in writing. By the time we were done, Mark was finished. But I wasn't satisfied just knowing he was broke and defeated. I needed to make sure Vanessa knew the full extent of her choices. I called her one afternoon, knowing she was likely still holed up in whatever dingy apartment she and Mark had managed to scrape together. She answered on the second ring, her voice flat and irritated. "What do you want, Eric?" "To thank you," I said, my tone dripping with mock sincerity. She scoffed. "Thank me? For what?" "For helping me realize what kind of people I don't want in my life," I replied. "Oh, and for making it so easy to destroy Mark. He's done, Vanessa. His so-called business is gone, he's paying me damages, and he can't even work in the same industry anymore." Her silence was delicious. "You backed the wrong horse," I added. "And now, you're stuck with a loser who's got nothing to offer you. You're a piece of work, Eric," she spat, her voice shaking with anger. "No, Vanessa," I said coldly. "I'm the guy who survived you and Mark. Enjoy your new life. You've earned it." I hung up before she could respond. Later that week, I heard through the grapevine that Vanessa and Mark were already on the rocks. Without money or a future, their relationship was imploding. It was poetic, really. Two selfish people tearing each other apart. But I didn't stick around to watch. I threw myself into rebuilding my business. With Mark out of the picture, I focused on strengthening my client relationships and expanding into new markets. It was hard work, but for the first time in months, I felt like I was in control again. I also started taking better care of myself. Therapy helped me process the anger and betrayal, and I leaned on my friends for support. They'd been there all along, waiting for me to see the truth about Vanessa. One night, months after everything had blown up, I sat on my porch with a drink in hand, reflecting on how far I'd come. Losing Vanessa had hurt, but it had also freed me. If I'd learned anything, it was this: betrayal doesn't define you. How you rise from it does. It's been almost a year since everything with Vanessa and Mark came crashing down, and life feels different. Not perfect, but lighter, cleaner. I've learned a lot about betrayal, resilience, and what it means to truly know yourself after the rug has been pulled out from under you. Looking back, I can see all the red flags I ignored. Vanessa's constant need for attention wasn't just a quirk. It was a warning. Mark's sleazy charm wasn't just an annoying personality trait. It was a calculated strategy. But hindsight is 20/20ths, and dwelling on what I missed won't change the fact that I survived it. I've rebuilt my business stronger than ever. After word got out about what happened with Mark, I had clients and colleagues rally around me in ways I didn't expect. It was humbling, but it also reminded me that not everyone is out to take advantage of you. On a personal level, I've been taking my time. I'm not rushing into relationships or trying to fill the void Vanessa left. Instead, I've been focusing on myself, working out, traveling, and reconnecting with friends. It's amazing how much clarity you get when you're not constantly trying to fix something that's already broken. One of the biggest lessons I've learned is that revenge, while satisfying in the moment, isn't a long-term solution. Sure, it felt incredible to dismantle Mark's plans and watch Vanessa's world crumble, but none of that would have mattered if I hadn't also focused on moving forward. Here's the thing about betrayal. It can destroy you if you let it. It eats at your confidence, your trust, your sense of worth. But if you can channel that pain into something productive, it becomes fuel. If you're reading this and going through something similar, here's my advice. Trust your gut. If something feels off, it probably is. Don't let anyone gaslight you into doubting your instincts. Gather evidence. Emotions can cloud your judgment, but facts are undeniable. Whether it's for personal closure or legal protection, having proof will save you in the long run. Focus on yourself. Revenge is tempting, but don't let it consume you. Use that energy to rebuild your life instead. Cut toxic people loose. Whether it's a cheating partner or a manipulative friend, don't hold on to people who don't value you. So here I am, Reddit 37, single and finally at peace. If someone had told me a year ago that losing my wife and facing a betrayal this deep would lead to a better life, I would have laughed in their face. But sometimes, losing everything is the only way to find yourself. Thanks for sticking with me through this wild ride. Life's messy, but it's also full of second chances. Here's to making the most of them. Cheers. Tumbler glass. After posting my story on Reddit and reading through the responses, I realized something surprising. I wasn't alone. Betrayal happens in so many forms, and people from all over shared their stories of heartbreak, resilience, and rebuilding. Knowing I wasn't the only one who had faced something like this was oddly comforting. But now it's time to look ahead. Over the past few months, I've been working on expanding my business in ways I'd never dared before. Losing Mark as a competitor, and Vanessa as a toxic influence, freed up so much mental space that I was finally able to focus on my vision. I've hired 2 new team members, landed a major contract with a regional distributor, and even started exploring new markets. I also took a solo trip. It wasn't glamorous. Just a week-long road trip through small towns, quiet beaches, and a couple of national parks. But it gave me time to think, to reflect, and to dream about what comes next. One thing I've learned is that healing isn't linear. Some days I feel like I'm on top of the world, invincible. Other days, a random memory of Vanessa will creep in, or I'll catch myself wondering what I could have done differently. But those moments are fewer and farther between now, and when they do come, They don't derail me like they used to. And then there's the question everyone keeps asking, are you dating again? The answer is, kind of. I've been on a few dates, nothing serious yet. I'm taking my time, making sure I'm fully ready before I dive into another relationship. I've learned the hard way that it's better to be alone than to settle for someone who doesn't truly have your back. As for Vanessa and Mark, the last I heard, they'd split up. Apparently, Vanessa got tired of living in a dingy apartment with no money and no future, and Mark, well, he's Mark. Selfish, manipulative, and ultimately alone. Do I feel sorry for them? Not really. They made their choices, and they're living with the consequences. If you're reading this and wondering how you can move on from your own betrayal, my advice is simple. Focus on your future, not your past. You can't change what happened, but you can decide what happens next. For me, the next chapter is all about growth, personally, professionally, and maybe even romantically. Betrayal knocked me down, but it didn't break me. And that's a victory I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. Thanks again, Reddit. You've been with me through the worst of it, and now you're here as I step into the best of it. Cheers to fresh starts and brighter tomorrows. Clinking glasses. As time has passed, I've realized that this chapter of my life wasn't just about betrayal. It was about transformation. Vanessa and Mark's deceit forced me to confront parts of myself I'd been avoiding. My tendency to overwork, my reluctance to set boundaries, and my blind faith in people who didn't deserve it. It wasn't an easy journey, but it was a necessary one. One of the most valuable lessons I've learned is the power of saying no. No to toxic people. No to situations that drain your energy. No to bending over backward for someone who doesn't give a damn about you. It's liberating to take back control, to choose yourself for a change. Another lesson? The importance of trust, but not blind trust. Trusting someone doesn't mean ignoring red flags or excusing bad behavior. It means being honest about who they are and holding them accountable when they fall short. I've also learned to forgive, not for them, but for me. I don't mean I've forgiven Vanessa or Mark in the sense that I'd welcome them back into my life. Far from it. But I've let go of the anger and resentment that used to weigh me down. Carrying that kind of pain only hurts you, not the people who wronged you. Forgiving them doesn't mean forgetting what they did. It means accepting that their actions don't define my worth. On a lighter note, I've started finding joy in the little things again. Cooking a new recipe, going for a run, reading a book. Things that got lost in the chaos of my marriage are now small but meaningful victories. I've also taken up hiking. There's something about being in nature that makes you feel grounded, like you're part of something bigger than yourself. It reminds me that life goes on, no matter how badly it knocks you off course. Every day I feel more like myself. The version of me that existed before Vanessa and Mark tried to tear me down. But stronger, wiser, and more intentional about how I live my life. I'm not just surviving, I'm thriving. If there's one thing I hope readers take away from my story, it's this. Betrayal doesn't have to be the end. It can be the beginning of something better. The strange, Reddit, how life can fall apart and still rebuild itself into something even stronger. The last few months have been a mix of reflection, growth, and surprising opportunities. I won't lie and say it's been easy, but for the first time in a long time, I'm genuinely excited about what's next. A major highlight? My business is thriving. With Mark out of the way, I've expanded into markets I never thought possible. The chaos he caused actually forced me to reevaluate and streamline my operations, and now my company is more efficient than ever. Last week, I signed a deal with a national distributor that will triple our reach. It's not just about the success, though. It's about the pride I feel knowing I built this from the ground up, despite everything that tried to tear it down. Personally, I've been exploring new hobbies and stepping outside my comfort zone. I recently joined a community hiking group, where I've met some incredible people who share my love for the outdoors. One of them, Claire, has quickly become someone I look forward to seeing every weekend. I'm not rushing into anything. Claire and I are just friends for now. But there's something refreshing about getting to know someone without the baggage of the past hanging over me. Speaking of the past, Vanessa tried to reach out a few weeks ago. She sent me a long email, full of half-baked apologies and excuses about how things got out of hand, and how she missed what we had. I didn't respond. Her words felt hollow, like she was just trying to claw her way back into the stability she destroyed. I've moved on, and I'm not interested in reopening that chapter. As for Mark, last I heard, he's working odd jobs and trying to keep a low profile. His reputation is in tatters, and no one in the industry will touch him. Poetic justice, if you ask me. But enough about them. This story isn't about Vanessa or Mark anymore. It's about me and the life I'm building now. For anyone reading this and feeling like their world is falling apart, let me tell you, it gets better. Maybe not right away and maybe not in the way you expect, but if you keep moving forward, things will eventually start to fall into place. I'm closing this chapter with gratitude for the lessons I've learned, the people who've supported me, and the opportunities ahead. Life is messy, unpredictable, and sometimes downright cruel, but it's also beautiful, resilient, and full of second chances. Here's to making the most of them. Cheers, hedge. Onward and upward. Clinking glasses. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any more interesting stories. And leave a comment with what you would do in this situation. See you in the next videos.